growing up as in an immigrant family in England, what was that like in that era? Was that a difficult, challenging time for you?
Um, Actually, that's the first time anybody's asked me that question. Was it difficult? So we lived in West London. My mum still lives in West London. It's incredibly diverse. There's people from all sorts of backgrounds. Having come back to the UK, at that particular time in '89, when the Berlin Wall fell and the USSR fell apart.
Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev has been removed from power, and there are tanks now in the streets of Moscow. Vice President Gennady Yanayev says he has taken over as acting president, as the head of state of a special state committee. You're watching live pictures from Moscow this morning.
We had students come over from various different countries that kind of were the fallout of the USSR, so like Armenia, Kazakhstan, and then there was various different wars going on the African continent. So there were kids that came over from Sudan, from Ethiopia, and then kids from Eastern Europe as well. So in a way, we weren't the only ones who were from an ethnic minority. But the thing that I probably remember the most was how my dad used to handle a lot of this, because when he came over in the 60s, he only found this out after he passed away, actually. He traveled to the UK on a visa with a friend of his by boat, the boat which stopped in Yemen, then in Italy, and then docked in the south of England. And he ended up going to Wales, where he was practicing as an architect. And they probably had never seen a brown person before. So he encountered quite a lot of racism in the late 60s, early 70s.
Why do you think they come after you?
Because we're black.
Most of the skinheads, as they still call themselves, live a quarter of a mile away. They produce similar arguments to explain why they wage war on the blacks.
Because the troubles that's been going on in the last few years has just gone by without incident, and the lads now have just got together and fighting them off. Because the colours are all roaming around, smashing windows, and now we've just got together to protect our homes.
And my mum as well, she's a qualified microbiologist, but when she came to the UK, she never practiced because she was told she was overqualified just with a bachelor's degree. So the way they brought us up was to integrate into society. They gave us very anglicised names. If you hear my name, Tina's name, or Sonia's name, you wouldn't think that we were Indian. They encouraged us to speak English at home because they didn't want us growing up with an Indian accent. And all of that was because their experience of picking up the phone to ask for a job had led to either them being turned down or not having the opportunities. And they didn't want that for us. They wanted us to be completely immersed in UK society and kind of grow up that way. So as a kid, I certainly never experienced any racism at school or, when I was out and about in London. I did when I went on a school trip up to the north of England to Bradford and places like that, which there's ethnic diversity, but it's in a completely it exists in a very different fashion to London. So that was the first time I'd ever had anybody say anything like, I was with a group of friends. It was in a girls' school, so there were quite a few friends of mine who were Indian, and we got asked if we had a really good tan or if we were French, and these people knew exactly that we were Indian. So one of my friends just laughed it off and kind of said, "Oh yeah, we're from France," obviously with British accents. So it was, I don't know if it was the right thing to do. I think by today's standards, probably not, because you should be free to be who you are. But my mum and dad had been scarred, I think, a lot from their experience, and they didn't want us to have the same.
July 1978. East End Asians call attention to their situation with a one-day strike.
All the coloured community are on strike because of racial attacks.
Brothers and sisters, today is the first day when you are going to lead the first black strike in England.
The strike was a community strike. It was not an industrial action. It was organized by the black workers in Hackney and Tower Hamlet in order to protest against the racist attack and the racist killing. We felt that our message has been going through to the government and the police.
After moving back to the UK, we were privileged enough to have Formula One on terrestrial TV, and we only had 5 channels at that point in the UK. Ever since then, it's changed, right, with loads of cable and satellite TV channels. But it was free to view, and the commentators were the legendary Murray Walker and James Hunt.
Well, it's a sad thing, Murray. I mean, with the greatest respect, Raback is not a world-class driver, and he's in an infinitely superior car to Carlos Reutemann, which just makes a mockery of Grand Prix racing, and I'm afraid it's the current rules and all the arguments in that having argued for 6 months or more over the rules and practically broken the sport, they then come up with a set of rules which is a load of complete rubbish.
And, you know, those guys just in their own right will inspire you to kind of find out more about motorsport. And because they had such a breadth of knowledge of what was going on with the team, with the cars, with the technology that was behind them. And this is like in the early 1990s. So 92 was like the year of the most phenomenal car that could ever have won a world championship with the Williams, with Nigel Mansell, you know, full active suspension, like crazy technology.
Nigel Mansell just underlines really what a terrible shame it is that we're losing him to kart racing in the United States, and it's a pity for everybody, but he's shown us today just what we're going to miss, because we will miss him. And he's driven magnificently. He took it pretty quietly early on, then in the middle of the race, he really put the hammer down and charged away from everybody and turned it into yet another very easy win indeed.
And as Mansell crosses the line, Mansell wins the Portuguese Grand Prix and a record 9th win in one season.
Terms that we were learning as we went along, actually not realizing that those technologies didn't exist in road cars and were probably years away from being in bog standard road cars that you could buy. But all of that was really fascinating to hear. So we watched Formula One, and then Murray Walker was commentating on touring cars at times, and then he was commentating on other forms of sport. We were buying magazines and publications like Autosport every week. Then there's a couple of engineering magazines that you can buy commercially. And so we got reading those. And it may sound strange, but ultimately, firstly, we had to ask permission to watch Formula One on TV, because if we were watching the TV, we weren't doing our homework. So my mum was like, well, you need to do your homework first. And then because we realized that it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday event, we started watching the practice sessions because they were televised. We started watching qualifying, you know, and we would go on the time scales of where the races were being held. So we were on Japan time or Australia time watching the events there. And it just escalated really, because it was fascinating. We'd never come across anything like that. And I don't know what my parents really thought at the time. My mum used to watch the Grand Prix with us, and used to get, maybe she got entertained by the excitement, I don't know, that we would show, because we were huge Senna fans. And we just used to get so engrossed, and it became like a family thing. I think my dad was the only one that wasn't that fussed about it. He'd just be like, oh, they're watching F1, I'll go and do something else, you know. But that was our time, and that's how it started, just watching F1 and then watching everything else.
Did you struggle early being a female in a quote-unquote male-dominated sport? And as the years have progressed, and particularly with the success that you've had, has that, if it was there, has that eased? And are people now just saying a race engineer is a race engineer?
When I started out, I didn't really think too much about the gender. And I was lucky that Tina was doing the same thing at the same time. So we had shared experiences of what was going on, and I could ask her questions about my role and my function and what should I do. She had a little bit more experience than me at the time, and vice versa. She could ask me the same. I don't ever recall us once having a conversation about life being difficult because we were women in what was predominantly paddocks that were there were just men there, mechanics, engineers, drivers. There was the odd team personnel who were female, but they were sort of kind of resigned to being the administrators in the teams as opposed to on the technical side.
Probably the question you are mostly asked, what is the advantage to be a female in this
That's not
job?
The most common question, but okay. No, the advantage. because I guess the thing is there's so few of us that do this. You're remembered automatically, and even if you haven't met somebody, they know of you through other people.
And through my career, I just got my head down and I just worked hard to be a good engineer, so that when it came to going to teams and asking them if they had a role that I could fulfill, they would look at what I'd done, what I was capable of, and that would come out first. And that's something that my parents had got instilled into myself and my sisters from a young age. You know, whatever you do in life, just be the best at it, work really hard, so that no one can question afterwards whether you got a position because of who you are. And I never really thought about it at the time, but they were referring to two things there, and it was being female and it was being of Indian heritage. And that's what I carried through. When I became a race engineer, I have to say, I was incredibly self-critical because I never wanted to make a mistake that could be put down to me being a woman making a decision or a choice. And I was the only one that thought that way. Nobody at Audi Sport or Team Yost ever thought I'd made a wrong choice or a right choice because of my gender. They just put it down to race engineer, she's made a decision, right or wrong, doesn't matter, pick up pieces, let's carry on. They never once thought anything like that.
When I first got asked to become a race engineer at Audi Sport, my first feeling was that the people around me were going to judge my decisions and my calls that I made, and if they were wrong, that it was because I was a woman. And actually, the only person who was thinking that was me. It was a personal perception because being the only female engineer on the team at the time, that's the way I viewed it, which is wrong because actually that wasn't the case at all. So what I did learn, I guess, is there's a lot more acceptability out there than you think with your peers, certainly with all the mechanics and engineers. I don't think after the first or second race or even the testing that we did together that they actually ever thought, oh, she's different to us. They just thought she's part of the team. All she wants to do is push the team forward and win.
That's the same thing that's existed in all the teams I've ever worked at. There's never been a case of we look at you as a female and that's like a huge deal for us. It's you're part of the team. You want to do the best. You want to be the best. You want everybody to work together. That's your function, and that's what you do. I think there's been more questions from people outside of the teams I've worked for, certainly, and maybe the industry as well, about whether it's difficult to be a woman in this sport. There are a couple of times where in the past, and probably even still now, I just kind of bang my head against the wall. I mean, we are few and far between. There's a lot more women now than there were back in 2010, 2011, when I first started out as a race engineer. I remember walking through the IMSA paddock a year or so ago with my data engineer, who's female, who works at Multimatic. And every team that we saw, there was a woman in there who was either working on the car or working with a laptop or tire fitters, or, you know, the breadth has increased significantly, and it was refreshing to see. But there are times when you just don't want to have to deal with guys. And I hate to say this, it's like the age-old thing, you know, women are from Venus, men are from Mars, if we remember that book. We all think in different ways. And yeah, there are times when it's incredibly frustrating. But, you know, that's the same in any job, that you're going to come across people, irrespective of their gender or their backgrounds, ethnicity, whatever it might be, that will frustrate you. And in the end, it's how you handle that situation. Do you let it slide? Do you walk away from it? Do you address it head on? Do you address it later? And what's the whole function of addressing it in the first place? Is it so that the team gets better and so that you get better as an engineer doing your job, as your function in a team? Ultimately, that's what it boils down to, that you've got to be able to get to that point that you can do your job as well as you can. And one of the things about being a race engineer, a lot of people think it's, you know, that spring change is why we run a race. The reality is it's not. You can make all sorts of setup changes and tune the car to where the drivers are comfortable and it's drivable for them. But ultimately, holding a team together and keeping a team in a place where it functions at the highest level to the best of its ability is something that a race engineer has to do, because you're the one that they look to when you're making a decision to come into the pits. Are you changing tires? How much fuel are you putting in? Are you doing repairs? Are you going to try and short fill? All of these things, it comes from one person's choice and decision, which is inputted from lots of different facets in the team. information that you take, you have to make a judgment call on. But you could get it wrong, or hopefully most of the time you get it right. And when you get it right, it builds trust, it builds the team that you need. So gender never comes into it in the end. It's all about how you handle the situation that you find yourself in, and how you progress as a team.